we don't hold a lot of stock because we've got a lot of sizes. So our average SKU holding, as opposed to that sort of 4 or 5 in the clothing world, is 1.1. So from an availability perspective, that's really challenging, because if you sell that one pair, you're completely out of stock. So you've gone from 100% availability to 0% availability with one sale. So that's very challenging from a supply chain perspective.
You're listening to Retail Disrupted, a podcast that explores the latest industry developments and the trends that will shape how we shop in the future. I'm your host, Natalie Berg. Welcome back to Retail Disrupted, where every week we speak to the leaders and disruptors shaping the future of retail. On today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Tim Payne. Tim is the managing director at Charles Clinkard, a leading independent footwear retailer in the UK. Tim's been with the company since 2008, and in 2020, he became the first non-family member to be appointed MD of the business. Tim, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Natalie. Great to be here.
Now, Tim, you probably know we have a lot of international listeners. So can you just give us a little bit of an overview of the business? I know it's been trading for over 100 years now. So if you could just give us a little bit of background and also tell us a little bit more about yourself and your experience.
Yeah, so Charles Clinkard, as you said, was founded just over 100 years ago, 1924, in a town called Middlesbrough in the northeast of England. Probably for international listeners, not the most well-known place. Been there for over 100 years. So it was an initial single store in Middlesbrough High Street back in 1924. And the company grew very, very slowly. So the second store was only added in the 1950s. The third store was in the 1960s. And by the time I joined the business, as you said, in 2008, so 18 years ago, we just acquired 12 stores from another footwear business called Steven Simpson in the UK. So at that point, we were roughly about 22 stores. And over the last 15 years or so, we've grown from that level to about 25 of our own stores. We've also opened some concessions, mostly in independent department stores across the UK. So we now trade from 45 locations. So that's grown quite significantly, certainly compared to the early part of the business. And we're also very active in the e-commerce space as well. So when I joined in 2008, our split of sales was 97% stores, 3% e-commerce. And we've now changed that to about 55% stores, about 35% e-commerce, and about 10% concessions. So a real change.
That's a huge shift.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, when I joined the business, the board were looking at the risk of that profile. So to have all your, or 97 of your 100 eggs in one basket is not good. It's very, very risky. And that's proved to be a very good decision, because obviously high street retailing, or traditional high street retailing, has proved very challenging over the last few years in the UK. So we've got e-com and concessions as a bit of a fallback for the tough times in stores, which is good. It's a much more sensible risk profile to have.
Yeah, much more diversified, which is, I think, the name of the game in retail now. We talk a lot about omni-channel or unified commerce, and you really do have to be. I don't think you have to be everywhere, but I think you do. You need to be where your shoppers are. So I want to come back to e-commerce, but first, I'd like to understand a little bit more about the business. And something we talk about a lot on the podcast is identity, understanding your USP, what it is that makes you special. And so, Tim, I'd love your thoughts on this. What is it that differentiates Charles Clinkard? And also, more generally, how important is it for businesses to have clarity around purpose and really understanding their reason to exist?
It's something we think about all the time. And we would say we have two core USPs with some others floating around, so unique selling points. So the main two for us, one is the level of service. So we see ourselves as a service business, a service retailer that happens to sell shoes, not a footwear retailer that does a bit of service. We're very much a service retailer. That's becoming, certainly over the last few years, against the main trend. Particularly with the rise in people costs, a lot of retailers are almost skimping on that side, that service, that personal one-to-one touch. But for us, it's very much a USP. And then our second USP is the width of brands we offer. So we're not mono brands. We do sell some of our own brand, but we have 95% of our business is branded. So on ladies, for example, we sell about 40 brands, on men's about 25, on children's about 15. Um, and what we do and what we see our job as a retailer is a curator for our customer. So we look at hundreds of thousands of shoes over a season, and we say to our customer, we think we understand you. We've really cut that down. Here's what we think you'd like in a 1,500 square foot shop and an e-commerce website. So those are the USPs for us. We drill down for the customer to stop them having to do that and having to go onto the internet, start from scratch. And we offer that personal level of service. So we spend a lot more time with the customer in store. The challenge for us is how we replicate that traditional in-store service online, because it's obviously a very, very different entity. We still offer very high level of service online. So our NPS is really high. We're in the high 80s on both of our websites. Um, but the challenge is, how do we keep doing that? And the customer expectations is changing all the time. How do we fit in with that? And that's a challenge. That's a constant challenge for us.
You've teed me up so nicely for my next question because I was going to ask about customer expectations. And
Mm.
can imagine that a challenge for a brand that has been around for a century is you have to balance your heritage, but then you still need to evolve to stay relevant. And especially in the current climate, because there is so much change, there is so much disruption. So I'd love to know, what are you seeing from your customers today? What are they looking for when they come into one of your stores or shop online?
Again, it's really interesting. We have a slightly older demographic. So our probably bulk of our customers are around the 55 to 70 years old bracket. We do have customers younger than that. We have some brands that appeal directly to customers younger than that. And obviously, we have a kids market, which is a slightly different thing. But in general, the bulk of our sales are in that 55 to 70 bracket. So their expectations are very, very different from the 18 to 24-year-old bracket, particularly around technology. So it's not to say that technology isn't very important for that generation. It is. And our mobile usage, we've seen that go through the roof over the last 3 or 4 years, which has really caught us by surprise. Um, so the technology adoption is there, but it's a different level of adoption to the 18 to 24-year-old, and it's a different way of interacting. So because we're a little bit behind the curve, that gives us opportunity to see what other people are doing, and we'll look at retailers who maybe in the next bracket down, and we think, right, our customer is going to come from that bracket into our bracket. What is it they like now that they may like from us in 5 years' time, for example? So it's a real difficult one, but we certainly know that our customer in store enjoys that one-to-one service. We get that verbal feedback all the time. We get customer reviews online. We spend a lot of time communicating that around the business. So we have what we call a company update. Not a very exciting term, but it's that's what it is. And we include customer testimonials as a big part of that. So people can really understand and get to feel what's going on out there, how we're servicing our customers, and also to embed the fact that it is really, really important for our business because it is a unique selling point that not a lot of people have.
Yeah, and I wonder how that translates when it comes to hiring and what you look for in store associates. Because if your USP, as you say, is all about service, and then from a customer's perspective, I guess there's also, you said one-to-one relationship building, that personalization, and maybe technology is helping to kind of elevate that, but it is still very much a human skill. So I wonder, what do you look for when you hire your store associates?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's a bit of a cliche these days, but we hire for personality rather than skill base. So we take the view that if someone's the right personality fit and they're reasonably bright, you can train them to do anything. We're not quantum physicists, we're retailers. There's fairly basic level of skills to some degree, and then you add complexity over time. But certainly to do the job at a starting point, it's not overly complex. So we look for personalities. We don't look for sharp type salesmen who'd be able to sell sort of sand in the Middle East, for example. We don't look for that. We look for people that have the right blend of knowledge around footwear, and we obviously train for that. But that personal one-to-one relationship with the customer, not pushy, just helpful. So that's really what we look for as a fit.
If we zoom out and look at footwear as a category, just looking more broadly, I think it shares some of the same challenges as the rest of retail. We've seen the rise of some of these newer, more nimble competitors. You mentioned the cost of labor. We've had supply chain disruption. I mean, the list sort of goes on and on. But then I think if you look specifically at footwear, there are some challenges that are more pronounced, like fit and sizing complexity, which of course has a huge impact on returns. I'd love to get your take on this. What are the trends, and also kind of what are some of the challenges that are unique to footwear, and what are you doing to tackle them? Sorry, I've just
Mm.
given you about 3 questions in one one
No, that's good.
shot.
That's good. Yeah, so I think the easiest way to answer them as a whole is if I had a choice which area of retail to go into now, I wouldn't go into footwear. It is incredibly complex. The main challenges are, as you point out, you've got a lot of sizes, and the sizes are really incremental as well. It's such a small actual physical change from a 4 to a 4.5 on a lady's shoe, for example, whereas clothing you can physically see they're that much bigger, going from a medium to a large or large to an extra large. But there's a lot of sizes and there's width fittings, and that is a challenge. So when I worked in clothing in my days at Debenhams, you generally have 5 or 6 sizes, and you'd have a decent amount of each of them. So you'd probably have 3 extra smalls, 5 smalls, 7 mediums, 5 larges, 3 XXLs on a rail at any one time. Whereas in footwear, because our price points as well are a little bit higher than average, we're sort of just above the mid market in terms of price points. We don't hold a lot of stock because we've got a lot of sizes. So our average SKU holding, as opposed to that sort of 4 or 5 in the clothing world, is 1.1. So we've only got an average of 1.1. So from an availability perspective, that's really challenging, because if you sell that one pair, you're completely out of stock. So you've gone from 100% availability to 0% availability with one sale. So that's very challenging from a supply chain perspective. Also, to clear stock is tough. We really try and balance the end sizes because, again, from a service perspective, we'd like to offer size 2 and size 3 for those customers because it's still roughly 2% of the population on the female side. But if you don't sell it in that particular store, you've got a real markdown risk. And the same at the other end. Although feet are growing generally, so when I started in the business, a size 4 was the average size. It's now just a 5, but going into a 6, and in the next 2 years, it will probably be a size 6 on ladies. And size 9s are becoming bigger than size 2s and 3s in terms of uh, split. To manage that is really, really tough, because you're talking about such small angles. And then if you go into kids, so as opposed to the 12 sizes we might have on adults, if it's got half sizes, kids might have as many as 26, because you've got all the width fittings, you've got an H fit and E fit, G fit, Y fit, etc. So it's a nightmare. So your actual stock holding of any one SKU is really, really small.
We talk about customer experience a lot on the podcast, and I'd love to know, when it comes to availability, as you just mentioned, and the challenges around that, if a customer comes in and they can't find the shoe in their size, what tends to happen? How do you try to kind of save that sale? Are there other stores that do you have access to store level inventory where you might try to say, oh, well, we can order from a different store, or do you divert them to your online to your website? What do you tend to do in those situations?
We offer everything we can is the first answer. So we had a bit of a breakthrough 12, 13 years ago. We had a bit of software that allowed us to see true stock position, so real-time visibility of stock. And that then meant we could layer in reserve and collect, click and collect, etc. We've also got a system called integrated store within our bigger ecosystem of IT that allows us to very quickly decide what's best for the customer. So the customer can say, right, I'd like that size. We can then look on the system and say, well, actually, we've got a delivery coming into this store next week. Is that best for you? Or if not, we can get it delivered here from a different store and we can have it within 4 days. Or if you want it posted to your home, we can do what is effectively an e-commerce sale, standard e-commerce sale, but through our integrated store. And they would then receive it next day or 48 hours, whatever it is they choose. So we offer everything at that point to try and keep the sale.
Yeah, that must be so important if, as you say, your stock availability can go from 100% to 0 very
Yeah,
quickly.
absolutely.
Having that
Yeah.
tech to unify that experience for the customer is so important.
Yeah, and it's about 12% of our sales now working from that premise in store. 12% of our sales are not taken away at the time, if that makes sense.
So you can see the commercial impact straight away. That's so interesting. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about e-commerce. I know you mentioned at the start of the conversation how much it's grown. Can you talk us through how you've approached e-commerce and also the role that it plays alongside your physical stores?
Mm. A traditional business like this one, as it was at the time, a family run business that was very, very strong at sort of store based operations, to then suddenly have this huge disruptive element came in was as tough as it has been for many businesses. So we, again, this is before my time, so it's only from things I've heard, but between sort of the end of the last century and the first 2 or 3 years of this century, there was a lot of debate at board level about e-commerce. There was one side of the business that thought, well, it's never going to work. Why would anyone want to buy shoes and get them through the post? You want to try them, you want to feel the quality of the materials, etc. It's really important to a customer, which is true. There's no doubt about that. And then there's the other side saying, well, if they know they've bought that brand before, they know that a size 5 in that brand fits them, they know the quality is good, they have trust in it. Why wouldn't they, if they want the convenience, if they don't have time to go out or would rather spend their leisure time doing something else? So we took the plunge in 2003. So it was a small local e-commerce operator who actually did print and design and other elements for us at the time. Said, "Oh, we're going into e-commerce. Would you like us to launch?" There was quite a big debate again at the board. There was a contact we had who owned a music business locally who had just gone into e-com and he'd been doing very well. And again, the thought was, well, that shouldn't do well because you want to feel the instrument, you want to touch it, you want to make sure it works for you. But no, he was doing an enormous amount of online sales. So we started with that website. It was pretty small and pretty well. We still got pictures knocking around the building. It was it's bizarre what they looked like in those days, websites. Um, but quite quickly, over a couple of years, we realised we needed to move on to probably a more progressive partner. So we partnered at that point. This is in 2005 with a business called VisualSoft, who are still our platform provider today. So 21 years we've been with them, and they've done a fantastic job for our services very well. And what they've allowed to do is grow from just that one charlesclinkard.co.uk website into what we now have as 10 selling channels. So we've got another website which is owned and run by us, caboolshoes.co.uk. So that's a German brand that we also wholesale in the UK as agents. And then we're on 8 other marketplaces. So ones you'd typically be on Amazon, eBay, etc. But we're also on with JD Williams and Debenhams and a couple of others. So they've allowed us to grow, and therefore we've kept with them. And we've always looked at metrics, KPIs. How is our e-commerce platform comparing to others? What is it that works for us? How good is our NPS? Is that to the platform? So we have analysed it in a huge amount of detail, but VisualSoft's always been the right partner for us. So it's worked really well because it's allowed us to grow in areas to compensate for the decline in the high street.
Yeah. And do you feel from a customer's perspective that people are generally more confident buying footwear online today than compared to just sort of, I don't know, 10 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot about that branding as well, because we're 95% branded. If people have bought that brand before, they're comfortable. So we can see which brands we get higher returns on. It's usually newer brands or brands that perhaps the fitting is a bit loose or a bit random, not quite as tight as the others. So yeah, we track loads of measures on that side, and returns have been pretty stable. It has gone through periods where returns have skyrocketed, and then we've put certain things in place and they've come back down, but it still runs at a reasonable level and one that's workable for us.
And I guess just to stick with the challenges around sizing for a second, with a lot of these customer pain points, technology is often a very positive disruptor. And I know when it comes to not just footwear, but clothing more generally, things like virtual try-ons, predictive sizing, or 3D scanners in stores. I mean, I think there's a lot of experimentation right now. And I think whoever cracks that is going to unlock this huge opportunity, right? Because then it has that knock-on effect on returns. But I just wonder, are you using any of this technology? Do you see this as something that might really move the dial?
We're keeping an eye on it. Whether it will move the dial, I think eventually but it's not quite right yet. That's our view. So we've been looking at it for about 10 years. So a company, fledgling company, approached us about 10 years ago and said, "Oh, this is brilliant. It will really work well with footwear." It was far too clunky for our liking, and there wasn't enough sort of return on investment potential. So it may have taken returns down by a couple of points, but the commercial benefits of that would have been outweighed with the cost of the technology. So we're keeping an eye on it. I don't think anyone does that brilliantly. The other thing we did, and we learned a lot through COVID pandemic on this, is sort of measure at home. So using gauges at home effectively, so people could buy gauges or they could print out a sort of a paper version of a gauge. Um, but we found that people would come into store to get sort of fully measured or to really try on a product when they wanted that true measuring service. We've always had an open mind, but the benefits in terms of reduced returns and the cost hasn't quite worked for us from a commercial perspective.
Yeah, it's super interesting to hear your view because I've speak to a lot of retail leaders about these kinds of topics, and I'd say that's kind of very similar to what most people say is that the idea is great, but it's just not there.
Mm.
So, and it's so interesting that people still using those like the actual sorry, you just described it really well, and I
Old-fashioned
can't remember what you
gauges.
said.
Yeah,
Yes, that.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Again, even in an in-store environment, there've been opportunities to replace that with technology. So there's very basic things that you put your foot in and it moves towards your foot and it puts it in the right place rather than squeezing your toe or anything like that. And there's other ones that will do a whole 3D scan of your foot and say exactly what it should be. But the sort of marginal gains of that is no different to just trying on a shoe and saying, right, I'm a size 4.5 and to a 5. If we sold a 4.6 and a 4.65 and a 4.7, then fine. Those sort of incremental measurements would make a difference. But really, you're just looking at what fits best when you try it on.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it is just the simple things, right? We don't need technology to fix everything, but
Sure, absolutely.
Tim, so just one final question for you. As we look to the future, I'd love to know what you're most excited about. So I know just now we talked about AI and technology. We've talked about the convergence of physical and digital retail. What will you be keeping your eye on as we look ahead to 2030?
Yeah, well, again, another cliche, I'm afraid, but the potential of AI is our biggest excitement in the business. So, for a business of our size, we're not huge. We're 45 million turnover. We've got 45 selling locations, 10 websites, etc. So we're very much a medium player in the retail world. We were quite early adopters of AI. So possibly more by luck than judgment, we sort of fell into a very interesting project. So we had a particular business challenge, and this was around the availability that we discussed earlier. So we have a lot of shoes in the business, but because of our branded margins, we can't afford once the sale comes to reduce a huge amount of stock because our margins just wouldn't be workable. So what we need to do is try and sell as much as possible at full price, and we move stock around the business to do that. Plenty of other retailers do it, but a lot don't. So those with higher margins will just say, well, it's cost prohibitive to move it around. Let's just stick it in the sale and take an extra £10 off or whatever to clear it there. We can't afford to do it. But we would enabling that process in a very, very manual way. So it would be a case of one person downloading some information from our database, putting it in Excel. There'd be 15,000 rows there, and they would go line by line and go, right, we need to move that shoe from that store to that store. And you can imagine the combination of shoes and stores that we have is absolutely enormous. So it took a huge amount of time. It would take 2 weeks to do the whole exercise across the business. Then it would take another week for stores to action it. It would take another few days from the logistical side. So by the time you'd started the process and finished the process, your data was completely out of date. So you're making decisions on old information effectively. So there was nothing on the market or nothing we could really build ourselves with our own in house skills. So we went to a university. We went to our local university, who were sort of seen as one of the best at computing science in the country, sort of top five on computing school, and
Which
said,
one was that?
that's Teesside University.
Okay.
Quite randomly, up in Middlesbrough here, they're very, very strong on the tech side, particularly on animation and gaming. There's a lot of gaming
Wow.
companies have sprung out of this area, which is very strange. But yeah, there we go. But it's all around the university. So we approached the university and said, we've got this business challenge. We're doing something that seems incredibly archaic. What can we do? And they said, this is prime area for something like machine learning. So where you can feed the data in, you've got an algorithm in there that will interpret that data very, very quickly and then spit out a load of suggestions. And that's what we did. It took us about 3 years. It was a three-way project between us as the business, the university as the facilitator, and a government body called Innovate UK. It was a project over 3 years. We had an associate that the university found for us, so a PhD student in machine learning, who came and joined the business, sat with us for 3 years, had supervision from the university, all the resources of the university, and built something through Python from scratch for us. She's now employed in the business. So that project finished about 2 years ago. She stayed with us as our head of data science. And the exciting thing for us is we've got the history of that, which worked really well. So we found, after trialing it as an A/B test in exactly half our stores, that it added 6% of sales to the bottom line, and about 10% profit in saved margin and markdown costs. So it was hugely successful for us. And the next one we're looking at is automatic replenishment. So instead of a merchandiser or a buyer looking through reams and reams of information on a Monday saying, we've got this much OTB, let's buy 200 pairs of that shoe, 800 pairs of that shoe. You feed the data, it gives you some suggestions, and it sends it off straight to the suppliers. So the time saving for us, yes, there's various costs, but the most important thing, other than the cost savings, is speed to market.
So interesting because, I think there is a lot of hype with AI, and there are a lot of things from a customer experience perspective that I personally don't think will necessarily stick. And it's just sort of the fun, shiny new thing. But when it comes to retailers actually becoming more operationally efficient, I mean, there's so much low hanging fruit. So, really interesting to hear how you guys are using it and the opportunities. Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been such a pleasure to have you join us today.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.